Hi Quilty friends, welcome to my little spot in Podunk. My name is Leanne and today I'm going to show you how to make this quilt behind me. It's a scrappy quilt, but it's a very controlled scrappy quilt. There's scrappy fabrics in each one of the blocks. There are some repeating fabrics throughout this, but they're so far apart you really don't notice it. You can use as many fabrics in your quilt as you want. However, the background was made from yardage and so were the borders. So I'm going to give you some numbers here in a little bit. So you'll want to go get paper and pencil while we have a little break. See you in a little bit. Okay, the first thing we're going to need to do is pull out our scraps and decide which fabrics we want to use. And for my quilt, I chose to not go with larger prints or anything with a lot of color in it. Something like this, I felt like it was just too much, but you may like that look. All the fabrics I chose were red and white fabrics. There was one or two that had a little pink in it, and I just felt like that was the best option for me, but you do what you like. It's your quilt. You don't even have to use the colors that I use. Pick from the fabrics you love and it'll be beautiful. So on to how I cut my scraps once I picked them. And what I like to do when working with scrappy is to layer them, which is what I've done here. Get them as straight as I can. And then of course, they would be ironed, but for the sake of time, we're not going to iron them. And I would just lay my ruler on there and make sure that I had fabric all the way around. It's a little bit wasteful, but these are scraps, okay? We can throw some of it away. I know I don't like to either. But then I would just cut around it, turn my fabric, and cut it again. Makes things a little bit faster. Okay, yardage. Now all my yardage is always overestimated, and that's the margin of error. Just in case we make a mistake, we don't have to worry about it, don't have to cry because we can't find that fabric anymore, because I often work with fabrics that you can't get anymore. But anyway, the white background, you'll need 2.5 yards. The red is for a thin border and the binding. You'll need 1.5 yards. And then the green border, you're going to need about 2 yards. And for the backing, which I didn't buy a backing, I'm going to use my leftovers for a backing. I bought a little bit more than I'm telling you guys to buy. But if you would like to buy a separate backing, it's 4.25 yards. And that's it, guys. Let's get over there and start sewing. This is everything we're going to need to make the 5 scrappy basket blocks this week. Before we get started, I want to mention that you're going to need some type of marking tool, whether it be a marker or a pencil, and a ruler to mark these diagonal lines on the back of each one of these fabrics. Okay, the first thing we're going to need is 5 12.5 inch by 2.5 inch yellow. We need 15 3 inch by 3 inch yellow, and draw a diagonal line on the back of each one of them. Okay, the red fabrics, we're going to need 20 3 inch by 3 inch red. We're going to need 50 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch red. And for these, this is the basket handle. So for each basket block, and there's 5, you're going to need to make a set just like this. So you'll have 5 sets that look just like this. And this is 9.5 by 1.5 inches and 2 5.5 by 1.5 inches. Okay, for the background fabric, we've got 5 3 inch by 3 inch white, 10 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch, and 10 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch. Now remember, draw a line on the back of each one of these fabrics. This fabric right here is 7.5 by 5.5, and we're going to need 5 of those. And the last piece, we're going to need 10 2 inches by 6.5 inches. Okay, that's it, guys. Let's head over to the sewing machine and get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is stitch up these half square triangles right here at the top of our block, and there's one in each corner. So that's going to take your 3-inch white squares, yellow squares, and red squares. All of them are 3-inch. They've got the white and the yellow have the diagonal line going down the center, so we can sew on either side of that. I'm going to show you how to do that. So it's all of your 3-inch squares. So all we're going to do is put right sides together with the red and the yellow. We'll do all the yellow the same way, but I'm not going to show me doing all of them the same way. And what we want to do is stitch 1/4 of an inch away from that marked line. And I tend to stitch it a little bit smaller than 1/4 of an inch. So I'm lining up my guide on the outside of that drawn line, just so it gives me a little bit of leeway, a little bit of play. And just stitch on both sides, and you can just feed them through there, one right after the other. And here again, we've got right sides together on the red and white, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Okay, once you get a big long chain of them stitched, you just flip them around. You don't even have to cut them apart, and start stitching again. Lining up your 1/4 inch and stitching. Okay, and then you just cut them apart and cut them right on that drawn line that you made. And then we're going to open them up and press to the red on all of them. And then let's go see how you trim these up. Okay, to trim up your half square triangles, you can do it one of two ways. I did a video that I will link to in the description about how to make this block locking ruler yourself, but we're going to trim these up to 2.5 inches. So I can just push that up against there and it locks, and I make sure that my 2.5 inches is inside there if my stitching's kind of wonky, but I'm looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just put my 2.5 inch line right on the edge of my fabric and trim it up. That way I only have to do it once. And there we have a 2.5 inch block, and all I've got to do is cut off that little piece right there. Now if you don't want to make a block locking ruler like this and you just want to use a plain old ruler, it's the same thing. I'm going to turn that to where we've got the 1, 2, 3 in that corner. Line up this diagonal line in the ditch of that seam and pull it all the way back if you can. And it looks like I did a pretty good job stitching, so my 2.5 line is on the outside of the square, and trim up the sides. And then all I have to do is come around and trim off my little wing. And that's all there is to it. You trim up the red and white the same way. Now that we have our half square triangles all squared up, we need to start laying out our block. Now I've started laying mine out, but before we talk about this, I want to talk about that. I've laid out all of them that match. You know, these two match, these two match, these two match. And the reason why I did that is to it just helps organize and lay it out here a lot quicker. I want to try to keep the red fabric, since I have duplicating fabrics. I want to try to keep them as far away from each other, and I want to do light, dark in the yellow. So let's talk about how I've laid this out, our block. At the bottom here we have our 12.5 by 2.5 inch yellow and two 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. Now, if you want to mark a line down the middle, you can. That's the way I do it, is a line down the middle. I haven't gotten this one marked yet. But each block will also need 10 2.5 by 2.5 red squares. And up at the top here, we have 2 by 6.5 inch and 2 by 6.5 inch. In the center is our 7.5 by 5.5 inches. And then here's the 2 handle baskets that are 1.5 by 5.5 inches. And then the top is 9.5 by 1.5 inches. And then we have a 1.5 inch square on each end. Right here is where the yellow half square triangles are going to go. So we're going to go like this, and we'll just pull from here. I'm just going to keep going straight across on this one and see how that works out for me. Whoops. Pick up the next one and lay it there. And then the next one here, and the next one here. So that makes 6 half square triangles. And I just wanted to make sure that these red fabrics, they aren't, the same prints aren't touching. And now we need a white and red half square triangle. We're going to turn it this way, and then come over here and get this one and turn it that way. Now what I'm going to do is I will lay out all 5 of these blocks, and then if I need to switch around some fabrics, I'll do that. Okay, so to put this block together, we're going to start up at the top. First thing we're going to do is this little middle section. We're going to sew each side of this on. And I do pin occasionally, not all the time, but sometimes. And I'm going to pin these since they're longer sections, and there's a possibility of stretching and getting too big. All right, but I'm not going to pin at the top, just at the bottom where I start or end sewing. I'm just going to press these out, the outside, and put it back on my design board. Now, I should have mentioned that I have a video for making these design boards. I'll link to it in the description below, and we're going to grab this one from the top, and we're going to pull these little corners off. Pull those little corners off, and we're going to sew that to the top. And if I have a fabric that doesn't have a seam, like this one, I like putting that on the bottom. I can watch my seams up here and make sure I get them going the right direction. Sometimes you know how those little boogers like to flip on us. We're just going to flip that out and give it a press. Now I tend to finger press a lot when I'm making my quilt block. I find that I don't get as much distortion, but if you don't like finger pressing, then by all means hit it with an iron. Now next we're going to put our corner pieces back on. Make sure they're going the right direction, and we are going to sew on that line. Now when I say on the line, I'm sewing to the outside. That way when we flip this fabric, we cut it off and flip it, we've got a little wiggle room if we need it, and we can always trim it down. We can't put it back on. So I'm going to sew to the outside of that blue line. Turn it around and do the other side. All right. Now we're just going to trim away the excess on the outside. Make sure that you're cutting on the outside of the block. And bring it around and cut the excess off here. Then we can flip this open. And it looks like I'm a little bit too big right here. You see where the white is hanging off? So I'm going to trim that off. Let's check this side. This side looks like it's a little bit big on the top, so we'll just trim it straight across. Looks good. And then I'll do the same here. I'm just going to trim it straight up. Now you could get out your ruler and do this with your ruler, but I really don't think it's necessary, but it's all up to you. You know, everybody has their thing. So I'm going to save these little pieces to use as feeders. Little feeder cheaters. Okay, and you can see that blue line, but that's blue water-soluble marker, and it will come out. So we're going to put it back up on the board, and we need to add these pieces to the side. Then we'll press them out. Okay, I pressed both of those out and we'll stick it up there, and it's looking so cute. Look at it. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom. Pull that out of there without, oh, I did it without making a mess. Well, without all those dropping. So again, I'm going to sew from corner to corner just to the outside of that line a little bit. We can always trim it up. Okay, now I'm going to trim off the ends again. And these bigger triangles that I'm cutting off, I keep those and sew them together. I could sew them together right now before I cut them, but just for time purposes, I'm not going to do that. I'll throw them off to the side here and sew them later. So then I want to press, whoops, I want to press these towards the white or the background. If you're not using a white background, it's the background fabric. And these look pretty good, so I'm not going to have to trim them. So I'm just going to set that down here at the bottom and start sewing these together. I'm going to work from this side to this side and do all 3 rows at once. I'll be pressing these seams open. Okay, I'm going to finish pressing up these last seams, or pressing open these last seams, and then I'm going to sew together the rows. I will be pinning the intersections, each intersection, since these are pressed open. I want to make sure that they match up as best as possible. But you don't have to if you don't want to. It's all up to you. It's your quilt. All right, those seams are pressed open, so I'll start from the top down and start pinning those and sew them all together. Okay, I've got all my rows sewn together, and what I'm going to do now is press those rows inward towards the center row. The top and the bottom row, press them inward. They kind of naturally want to go that way, so that's the way we're going to let them go, is press them both toward that center row. Looks like a tulip there, doesn't it? The things I think of. I didn't notice that till right now. Okay, now we can sew our handle and our bottom to our basket. Okay, we've got our top and the bottom, the top, the handle and the bottom of our basket sewn on, and we're gonna press them. I'm gonna press the bottom down towards the bottom of the basket. And then up here, there's always an exception to the rule. You see how the basket handle just kind of wants to fold up over the top. It just wants to naturally do that because there's less bulk. But this is one time that I'm gonna break a rule. I'm actually gonna press it towards those half square triangle, and that's because I'm going to be putting applique in this area, and I want that stem of the flower to be able to butt up against that fabric to help hide the edge of the fusible raw edge applique that I'm going to be doing. So there's our block. I think I may need to press it before putting the applique on, but it turned out really, really cute. I'll meet you over at the ironing table to start doing applique. Now that our basket blocks are complete, we can start adding our applique. I chose to do fusible raw edge applique, but you can do it however you like. If you're doing turned edge applique, that's totally acceptable. You'll want some glue or some pins to pin things in place. I wanted to show those who are choosing also to do fusible raw edge that how I made the stems. And I took a scrap piece of fabric and cut my fusible just a little bit smaller. I hope you can see that. A little bit smaller all the way around and fused it to that scrap. Leaving that little end allows you to grab a hold and pull that fusible off when you leave a little bit of the fabric on the end. That'll be hidden underneath the applique anyway. And then I'm cutting my stems for the basket block a 1/4 inch wide, by 2 1/4 inches long. But I think I'll need to trim that off a little bit. So here's one that I cut off, and as you can see, that little piece of fabric right there, and I can easily pull off the backing. And to put the stem down, we're just going to find that middle seam on the basket block and put the stem right there. And I'm just going to hit it, or hold it just a little bit to hold it in place. And down here, I'm pushing it right up against that seam. But I don't want to fuse that down just yet because I may want to trim some of that off. So I forgot to take the fusible off this part. All right, so here's my flower. Take the fusible off of that also. And I'm going to I want to put it a 1/2 inch away from the basket handle at the top. You can use any ruler you want. You can just use a ruler like this, or you could use something like this to get your 1/2 inch, but it's going to be a 1/2 inch from the top. So I'm going to put that right like that and get my flower. Now I'm going to line my flower up to where the middle, it's straddling that stem. And it doesn't matter which way you turn it. There's no right or wrong way with these because the flower is the same no matter which way you turn it. And then I'm just going to push it right up against that ruler and make sure that it's centered on the stem, and it is. And then we'll get our little circle. We're going to eyeball that because as quilters, we're pretty good. Even if you're not a quilter, we're pretty good at making it look like, it's right dead in the center. It may not be, but I bet you it's pretty daggone close. So we've got all that in place. And then my leaves, I'm just going to put right up against the edge of that stem on both sides. And now we can fuse everything into place. And then I always turn it over and give it another press from the back, just a little bit longer. And we're ready to take that to the sewing machine and stitch it down. Okay, for our applique block, we're going to need to do things just a little bit differently. Not going to be quite so easy, but it's not going to be hard either. What we're going to do is cut a piece of fabric that is 13.5 by 15.5. Now this is bigger than what we need it because our basket block is 12.5 by 14.5, but we're making it bigger so when we stitch down our applique, if there's any puckering or pulling in, we can trim it off to the right size. So you're going to need something like a Mark Be Gone like this, or chalk, or something that that you've found reliable that you can mark on fabric and it will come out. So on this side, we're going to mark it at 1.5 inches in. Now remember, this is 15 inches long. 1.5 inches in, we're just going to draw a line. Then we're going to come over on the other side and do the same thing at 1.5 inches. Draw a line. Now, at the top and bottom, we're going to go in 2.5 inches and draw a line. Once we get those lines drawn, then we're going to draw a line from corner to corner where those lines cross, and then this way on the other side, corner to corner. And we're all done with that for now. First thing we need to do is to put our circle in the middle. So I'm going to take it and fold it in half and give it a little pinch right on that side and a little pinch over on this side. That makes a little crease. And then we're going to fold it in half, meet those or match up those two little creases, and do the same on those sides. Just give it like a little pinch. Then we're going to line those pinch marks up with the lines that we've just drawn. And if you have a hard time seeing it, you may have to come down and look at it at an angle to get it exactly right. And that one's right, and that one's right. Okay, I think I've got it about as close as I'm going to get it. And then I just always eyeball the center circle, but you could certainly do it the same way by giving it a little pinch. Okay, what I'm going to do, since I'm doing fusible applique, is I'm just going to touch this a little bit to fuse it down so it doesn't shift. If you're doing hand sewn or invisible machine applique, you can put a pin in it or put some glue on it to hold it down in place so all this doesn't shift around. And that'll just hold it tight. But if I need to move it, I can, because I haven't used up all my glue. Okay, now that we've got that in place, we're going to put our little flower in the corner. So to do the flower, you're just going to center up. No matter which way you turn this flower, it's the same, so it doesn't matter. Right here, you're going to look for that line that we drew going right into that point. And we're going to push this up into the corner and make sure that our flower is centered on that point. And push it up till those petals touch the lines that we've drawn. Okay? Now if you want, I think I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm just going to give it a little hit with heat so it stays put. It doesn't move. And then I'm going to get my stem fabric, which I've cut at 1/4 inch wide. And I'm just going to stick it up underneath there until it's centered with that line. I'm going to stick it up underneath there till I can't see the end of it. And I'm going to cut it right there to where it's about 1/4 inch or so underneath that circle. And I'm going to line that up again because it kind of wanted to shift. Make sure it's lined up. You can pull it backwards to see if you're still at 1/4 inch or you're still down the center, and yes, I am. So it's good to go. I can now fuse that one in place. I've got a little string hanging out here. I've got to get it. All right, to put the leaves on, oh, we got to put our little center in. I almost forgot the little center. There again, I'm just eyeballing it. And we'll just give it a little heat in case we decide we want to move it. For now, we're just tacking it in place. For the leaves, to put the leaves on, we're going to use our ruler again. You can use any ruler, it doesn't matter. But what I'm wanting is for it to be 1/4 inch off of this circle. So I'm going to put my ruler there and make sure that the line on your ruler is straight with the ruler or the lines that we drew from corner to corner. And then I'll take my flowers or my leaves and put them right up against that stem. There we go. And that looks pretty cute. Now I'm going to, with a little heat, and be sure not to mess it up right there. See, I left that open. You don't want to hit heat there, but I've put all that into place. Now I just got to make every one of them just like I did that one. Okay, I've got them all on there. I'm going to give them all a good press from this side. And then I'm going to flip it over and press it from the back side. Now the amount of pressing time that you take for yours depends on what type of fusible that you're going to use. So that's why I'm not giving any time. Just a few seconds is all it takes. Otherwise you melt it in too much. So now we can stitch this down and trim it up. Okay, once we get our applique all stitched down, we need to trim up the block to 12.5 by 14.5. The way we're going to do that is we need to press the block in half this way, make a crease, and we're going to take it and mark it with a little blue line where we've creased it, and then we're going to fold it the other way and do the same thing. Right on that crease, I'm putting a mark, and it'll show through to the other side. Okay, now we're going to line up that crease with one of the lines on our board, and we'll line up the bottom of the block down here. Okay, so this way we need to cut it 12.5, and we need to take half the measurement of 12.5, which is 6.25. So you can either count over 6.25 this way, or you can use your ruler. I'm going to use the ruler this time, and I'm going to line it up with that center mark. The 6.25 line is on the dots that I just made. And then we will trim it on both sides, on this side, and then we'll come over here and do the same thing. Line it up with the dots that I made at 6.25 and trim off the excess. Okay, now we need to turn our block this way and do the same thing. We're going to fold it in half. Make a little mark right where we folded it in half. And unfold it. Line it up with one of the lines going this direction and a line going this direction. And this time, instead of cutting at 6.25, we're going to cut at 7.25. So we're going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there's the 2 5s. So I'm going to put my ruler on there and trim it up. Then we'll do the same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there's the 2 5 mark, quarter mark. And trim it off. And now it's ready to be sewn into the quilt. Put in between each block, as you can see, a 2.5 by 14.5 inch strip. Now we just need to sew the rows together. Okay, now we need to add our sashing in between the rows. So we're just going to flip this up, sew it to the bottom, and do the same thing down here, and then sew all of these together. This sashing piece is 40.5 by 2.5. Okay, to make the first round of borders on my quilt, the white ones, I like to sew all the strips together just straight. You could, by all means, sew this at a diagonal if you wanted to, a 45-degree angle. But I really just don't find it necessary with this quilt. We're going to sew each side, and then we'll sew the top and the bottom. The sides are cut, there's 2 of them, at 46.5, and then the top is cut at 44.5, and so is the bottom. All right, we're on the home stretch and we're down to the last 2 borders. So it was really hard to get the whole quilt into the picture, so we're just going to do the best we can here. All right, so the red border, we need 2 cut at 50.5 by 1.5. That will be both sides of the quilt. And then the red at the top and the red at the bottom are 46.5 by 1.5 inches. And then with the final green border, the 2 sides are 52.5 by 6.5. And then the top and the bottom border are 58.5 by 6.5. We'll attach the 2 red sides, press them out towards the red, then attach the top and the bottom red and press those out towards the red, and do the same with the green borders. Okay guys, here she is, all done with the borders on. I haven't quilted it yet. It'll probably be a few weeks before I get it quilted. I do have my binding ready. It's sitting here on a stool wrapped up with extra border fabric and backing fabric, and I will use that, or background fabric, and I will use those to make my backing. Okay, there was one more thing I wanted to show you before I go, and it was these blue lines on this block that I drew on there earlier. All the rest of them I have sprayed off. Well, 2 of the blocks I've sprayed them off, but on this one it's still there. And I wanted to show you what I spray it with. Soda water. And you put in 1 cup of water and 1 teaspoon of baking soda and shake it up. And then spray those lines, and they will go away forever and never return. I've been using this for about 6 months, and I've not had any problems whatsoever with blue lines returning. Now, I will say that I do wash my quilts right after they are quilted. As soon as they come off the frame, I throw them in a washing machine and wash them. So you're not supposed to leave the blue marker set for more than 2 months. All right, y'all. We made a cute quilt today, and I hope that you enjoy making it as much as I did. I've drank me a couple cups of coffee, so I have enough energy to clean up all this mess back here. And then sometime in the next couple of days, I'm going to start this new quilt pattern that's right here. If you'd like to see more of my videos, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification. Also, give it a little like. It's a little thing that you can do that helps me out a lot, and it doesn't cost you a dime. So until next time, guys, you're welcome in Podunk anytime. I love you. Bye-bye.